Welcome to the last full production of Forward Theater's Sweet 16 season, and welcome to our pre-show introduction for A Case for the Existence of God by Samuel D. Hunter. I'm Marcella Kearns, and I'll be your guide for an inside look at the play, its history, production team, and more. Thank you so much for joining us. About the play and its history first. The story you'll see at the theater is quite simple. You'll meet two men in a cubicle in Twin Falls, Idaho. Keith, a mortgage broker, is working with a factory worker, Ryan, to try to acquire some land that used to be in Ryan's family. An appointment for financial advisement evolves into a path to friendship as the two men, who at first couldn't be more different than one another, discover a tender point of connection. They're both single dads to very young daughters. The title of the play may connote some religious content, but though Hunter confesses the elements of faith or religion often find their way into his plays, he's not getting specific on us. In short, there's a case to be made that he is examining what it means to be human, what it means to be there for one another, not to mention what it means to be a 21st century man. Beyond that, I'll leave you to consider what it means to you. The New York Times review of the play's premiere says that it may also be the purest example yet of Hunter's approach to playwriting as an experiment in empathy. Hunter was inspired to write the piece after his own experience with just how phenomenally difficult it was to get through two major life changes: buying an apartment with his husband and adopting a child. He was struck at how these pretty straightforward processes could be so hard, and that telescoped out to him into a reflection on how difficult it is for the American middle class at the moment. Side note, he started writing the play when his daughter was a baby, and now she's 6 or 7. Of the play itself, Hunter says there are moments of lashing out on both characters' parts, and I think it's because culturally, we don't have a language for platonic male love, especially between a straight man and a gay man. The expectations of gender norms compact men's, and especially straight men's, emotional and spiritual lives as they grow up. For more reflection on what the characters of Case find as they traverse each other's orbits, I invite you to check out advisory company member Mike Fisher's essay in your program when you go to the theater. For now, I'd like to throw to you some questions that the production team explored in the rehearsal hall. From our assistant director, Joseph Green, he says, I would say one of the largest through lines was one image that came to mind, came up during some of the first days in the rehearsal room. Someone had brought up the image of the calluses these gentlemen bear. Of course, calluses can be helpful in allowing you to endure, but what happens when you don't need to survive anymore? What happens if these calluses, in other words, are in the exact place that allow you to speak on and share your own pain and strife? If it sits as a heavy hindrance in your ability to reach out and become close with other people? We can't simply rip them off. That would be more harmful than helpful. This through line then in the rehearsal hall, Joseph says, took two paths, really defining what the specific calluses are in each character, as well as the process by which each person is able to remove them. Above all, this is a story about two people finding each other during moments of their life when they need that connection. So what do they need in order to be able to see and be seen, to overcome in themselves, in each other, and in the world? These plays' questions are timeless, but the play itself is quite new. Directed by David Cromer, Case premiered off-Broadway at Signature Theater in April 2022 and enjoyed a few extensions in its run. That year, it won the New York Drama Critics Circle Award for Best Play. Over the course of the last few theater seasons, it's had multiple productions around the country. In fact, Case is on Theater Communication Group's list of the top 10 most produced plays of the 2024-2025 season, with Forward's one of the 9 that have been tracked by that group. Sam Hunter is also on the list of the top 20 most produced playwrights this season. Before we dig into the playwright and our production itself, I'd like to talk a little bit about money. Oh, yes. As Ryan, one of the characters in Case, is seeking assistance with his mortgage, he confesses, "Money stuff makes me nervous." Ryan's case isn't that unusual. Financial literacy is a charged topic in our society, but as important as it is to the systems under which we operate, it's not really taught on a broad scale. With the two expensive and complex processes the characters are traversing in Case, adoption and purchasing property, Hunter explores the wide disconnect between the expert and the layman, and how easily the layman can be left behind. Financial literacy refers to a facility with, you guessed it, a spectrum of financial skills. General skills may include budgeting, learning how to manage and eliminate debt, saving for retirement, learning about credit and investment, and more. Those who are not literate may really be more subject to compounding debt woes, the danger of fraud, foreclosures, bankruptcy, or even predatory lending. Earning, spending, saving, borrowing, and protecting your money are 5 principles by which to measure financial literacy. So I'm going to ask you to listen during the performance to Ryan's history and present with money, his relationship to that. How secure is he, or does he perceive himself to be? What does he acknowledge about the realities of being a working class American? What insight does Keith provide under the umbrella of his expertise as a mortgage broker, beyond, of course, the moral support that he may offer Ryan in his own journey? And yes, for playgoers, you and me, how savvy are you? You don't need to be to enjoy the play, of course, but would you like to check in about it? Where do you fall on the spectrum of financial literacy, with Ryan at one end and Keith at the other? Some questions for you regarding mortgages and loans to gauge, if not your understanding, your feelings about the terms as these questions come up. What's the difference between a mortgage broker and a mortgage lender? What's a change cap on a loan? What's a closing agent? So, how do you feel? For me, needless to say, it's really complex. I get a little nervous myself, so I can completely understand Ryan's uncertainty as he decides he's going to try to make a very big investment that's going to affect his life for a while. Let's turn to the playwright himself. Samuel D. Hunter, to put it plainly, knows his stuff. He was one of the MacArthur Genius Grant Fellows in 2014, and he boasts 3 degrees in playwriting from NYU, Juilliard, and the Iowa Playwrights Workshop. Ford, as mentioned, has produced the paired plays Lewiston, Clarkston. Other well-known titles include Greater Clements, Pocatello, A Bright New Boise, Great Wilderness, The Healing, and The Few, among others. Especially in the public eye is The Whale, which enjoyed a recent film directed by Darren Aronofsky and starring Brendan Fraser and Sadie Sink. Fraser's comeback to the film scene on this earned him an Oscar for Best Actor. Hunter himself wrote the screenplay adaptation. Now, Hunter's material is not strictly autobiographical. He might say that he tended to hold his own history at arm's length until really the years-long tender process of writing The Whale. But inspirations and the parallels between his own life passages and conflicts in his plays are really transparent. And he has noticed over the course of time how much more personal his work has become. He was born in Moscow, Idaho in 1981, and he grew up in really tricky circumstances, he might say, as a young gay man in that area. He says the most tragic moments in his life, in fact, have been one of, quote, isolation. He attended a religiously conservative high school and had to leave that school when he was outed as gay. Shades of history. In The Few, among others, a young gay man really feels keenly the pangs of being a misfit in his own small town. Hunter spent some years after that point self-medicating depression with food, a history that would one day lead to the inspiration behind The Whale, the story of a writing teacher slowly doing himself in through food. Today, another, not parallel, but an echo, Hunter lives with his husband and his young daughter in New York City. So not surprisingly, the two single dads of Case are parents to young daughters. The playwright's process. I'd like to share some Hunter on Hunter, his thoughts about how he writes and with what kinds of questions and spaces he finds himself engaged. Hunter had always liked writing, but really hadn't landed on his medium until he saw two different productions of very specific plays, Our Town by Thornton Wilder and Angels in America, specifically Part 1, Millennium Approaches by Tony Kushner in high school. Both opened up to him words in time and space, the inherently theatrical. In his telling, he shares that the first play he wrote was when he was about 16 or 17, as I said. It was 3 hours long, and he was actually able to convince his community theater to put it on. In fact, they gave him, I think, $300, he said, to produce it. When he ended up applying to a writing program at NYU, however, he had a writing submission restriction of 25 pages. So he wrote for that a two-person piece that, in his words, just immediately, instantly made him a better writer. He began to understand the benefits, in other words, of restriction, of creative restriction, of giving yourself some boundaries. Then at college, at the end of his freshman year, he ended up writing a play about Idaho after not initially really finding his sea legs, and something in him really opened up inside. In an interview with fellow playwright Caridad Switch for American Theater, Hunter says, "Once I started writing about Idaho, it sort of took over. More and more, it doesn't even feel like I'm intentionally setting my plays there. It's just what I do. That being said, I don't think of my writing as being particularly regional. That Idaho is less about the physical Idaho 3,000 miles away from my apartment in New York than it is a fictional Idaho that I've sort of been building with each play." He continues that he used to explain that he was writing about a part of the country that was really underrepresented, but he's starting to really find that Idaho is becoming more of a blank canvas that he keeps coming back to. So he will say that the power of that place is really less about its specificity and more about its lack of specificity. So, in other words, he may set up something in Idaho, but he feels like it could take place almost anywhere. It's just that considering it in that area really helps him connect to it very personally. Of what he strives to do in general with his work, he says he feels like his job is to construct characters and put them in association in very specific situations or circumstances, and then just really get out of their way. So he also finds it very important that he isn't trying to send a message, that he isn't telling people what to think. He isn't providing commentary. He's writing important things, but he himself actually gets really frustrated with plays that he feels like are delivering a message rather than asking questions. That said, there's one thing that you will never experience of a Hunter play: cynicism. I'd like to quote him once more here. "Early in my career," he said, "I made the decision that I wasn't going to be a cynical writer. To me, cynicism is easy and intellectually bankrupt. The harder thing is to have faith in someone and to have hope, especially right now." I venture to say we might all agree with that. How did Case end up in our season slate, and why? Here's a broad overview alongside some personal thoughts from our artistic director, Jen Uphoff Gray, who is also directing the play. If you follow the forward season, you've really been able to see by now how the major through line we chose to explore in selecting our main stage titles this year was very much about relationship. And if you haven't, I'm here to break it down for you. 3 out of the 4, including A Case for the Existence of God, are plays with 2 actors or two-handers. Even Murder Girl, with a cast of 6, presented a significant number of scenes in which 2 characters alone navigated seismic shifts in their relationships with each other. All 4 lean heavily and overtly into friendships, family, and chosen family. We've really actually, I think, navigated the immense vulnerability that the one-on-one connection in each play requires. Deep listening, the courage to speak up, the courage to reserve speech, honest admission and reflection, and really at core, the resolve to stay present for one another in circumstances that really test that connection. As Jen Gray frames it, coming out of the most difficult days of the pandemic, quote, "We're still figuring out how to find and renegotiate friendships. There's a lot of desire and apprehension to connect. All of the plays get at that, the beauty of connection," end quote. A Case for the Existence of God was the 3rd play we secured for this season. Jen read it several years ago. When Ford returned to producing in person in 2021, and we staged Hunter's Lewiston Clarkston, Jen directed Lewiston. She found it a joy artistically, for she knew how the characters talked and lived in space together. To a significant extent, that identification with how a playwright uses language, story, and structure, or speaking the playwright's language, means a director or artistic director will be tuned into later work by that playwright. Case was no different. It made me laugh, cry. She shared 2 men, black and white, without much in common with each other, living in rural Idaho. It's human, funny, vulnerable, real. Jen was also excited by Hunter's restrictions on how the characters show up in space. How to stage the play would be a big challenge for the director. And luckily, she got her dream cast to do it. So, speaking of that dream cast, I would like to introduce the actors you'll see in this production. Jamal James returns to Ford after appearing in 46 plays for America's First Ladies and Kirsten Greenwich's Feeding Beatrice. He is also a familiar face at American Players Theater. Josh Krause, who plays Ryan, is familiar to stages from the Milwaukee to Spring Green corridor. A member of Forward's advisory company and a core company member of APT, he most recently appeared on the Forward stage as Shreddy Eddie in Airness, our air guitar play. Though Jamal and Josh have shared the stage before, this is really arguably their most in-depth collaboration as scene partners yet. Now, you may have heard me reference the benefit of some kind of creative restriction over the course of this lecture. I'd like to introduce you now to that concept as it applies to the script of Case and our production design. Where do we start? With Hunter's directions regarding the space we encounter in his play. He says specifically, unless indicated, neither character ever stands up. To bring audience into the characters' worlds as intimately as possible, Jen hoped from the very beginning, early on, that we would be able to stage this play in the round. The last time and the first time Forward produced a play with audience on all 4 sides of the playing space was for Every Brilliant Thing with David Daniel in February of 2020. To make the playhouse an arena space in the round means placing a section of the audience up on the actual stage and using the ground level playing space as the area in which the actors will work. So, who's responsible for that work? As with Summer 1976, our scenic designer on case is doubling up as the lighting designer as well. Noel Stolmack is a member of Ford's advisory company and a frequent artistic collaborator. Her most recent lighting design with Ford was in last season's What the Constitution Means to Me. In discussing the design at first rehearsal, Noel said simply, "We dream big dreams. Every audience member will get to see the show from a different perspective." Noel envisioned a turntable and proposed different bases. She and Jen landed on a green surface underneath, which will remain static. The 7-inch deck on top of it, a carpeted area, and the cubicle of Keith's workplace will rotate throughout the show. Turning to costumes. Jason Orlenko, a Milwaukee-based artist, as well as Noel, returns to Ford as our costume designer. His work was last seen on last season's Clydes. With this production, since actors never leave the stage, indeed, there are 2 costumes, really just regular clothes, he says. As often in realistic plays or film, he continues, the whole objective here is that the costume design is invisible and that they feel like real people in a cubicle, flannel and jeans, real people in real clothes. It's exceptionally exciting. Don't let the real clothes fool you, however. A hallmark of Jason's design is actually his detail, texture, color, accessory. Consider when you see the production what story the details may be telling about each character, from their personality to their history. Another aspect of design to highlight for its nuance here is sound. Ford's resident composer and sound designer Joe Cerqua, whose work you may have last heard through attending either Summer 1976 or Murder Girl this season, has an intriguing plan for Case, crafting a 2-instrument score. We made that decision because of our character Keith's love of polyphonic music, Joe explained at first rehearsal. Polyphonic music has more than one melody in it, more than one instrument. There are instruments as well that operate that way, like guitar, piano, violin. You can actually play more than one note at a time, or even one melody at a time on each. So we're partnering Ryan's character, Josh's character, with guitar, and Keith's, Jamal's, with a violin. The concept for the score, which exists outside of the show, is that these 2 instruments will sometimes play things solo, and sometimes they'll play things together. If polyphony means harmonic balance, then I think this is a really lovely oral metaphor for the relationship the 2 men develop over the course of the play. So if any of you are real music fans out there, you may actually be able to follow the story of the play through hearing transitions. That might be a little far of a stretch, but I know for myself, that's one of the elements that I'm going to pay attention to when I'm in the house. So, how did we rehearse this piece, knowing not only that it would be in the round, but also functioning with a rotating floor? Jen said that after the first week, everyone's brains were a little broken in the rehearsal hall, but I'd like to share with you some insight into this process. It's so complex. It's really fascinating to me. Stage manager Sean Galligan produced first a scene breakdown that included every scene, every page, and each character. Within that grid was also carefully noted what position the set would be in during that scene. The plan was to rotate the set between scenes. If you could see the chart, you'd see notations such as second position, 32.72 degrees clockwise, or eighth position, 229.04 degrees clockwise. Yes, indeed, it is very precise. In the rehearsal hall, then, Sean taped out the playing space and a circle outside the space which could approximate positions of the audience. In rehearsal, Jen would move to try to envision what an audience from that particular point in the house would see. For the designer run of the play, Understudies, designers, and staff who were watching on Zoom from a distance were also treated to Sean marching the camera around the circle while those in the space hopped from chair to chair. Now, since actors Josh and Jamal don't leave their seats unless the script dictates that they do so, meaning they're compressed into a cubicle space and their chairs for much of the play, the technical had to meet the creative in a very minute way. Who's leaning forward? How is one of the actors turned? Are they backting or acting with their backs? Because this part of the audience won't have the benefit of seeing their face for a stretch. How can the position of a chair open them up or close them from a particular section? The goal was, to be clear, not to make sure the whole of the audience can see an actor's face for the whole time. That is not only impossible, of course, but also one of the really interesting creative restrictions of an arena space. The key is what you may be able to read from any given position: proximity, height, angle, and what that says about the character's conditions in that given moment. The effect, you may notice when you see the play, actually feels quite cinematic. Cutting-edge directors and cinematographers are making very interesting use of visibility and angle these days. One fine example of that is the Apple TV series Severance, which also takes place in part in cubicles. Sometimes the viewer may catch a glimpse of only half of an actor's face, though you hear them. Sometimes furniture or set dressing conceals part of a reaction, and you, as the viewer, have to fill in the rest of the picture with your imagination. The effect is both distancing and inviting, and it really makes you lean in. So enjoy. I'd like to share a few other notes of interest about a few of our other production team members and a little detail about them. Abby Hess, our assistant stage manager, apart from stage management stint on King James early this season, has a very precise job on case. Think of her. Abby will be under the stage with an infrared camera and operate the turntable between scenes. Don't worry, they'll not be as Conan the Barbarian was on the Wheel of Pain by any means. The turntable is actually quite mechanized. It's basically lifting a lever and making sure that it's set in those very precise degree positions from scene to scene. They took some time in tech to be able to get this concise, and measuring it, then they also put actors on stage, which meant that they had to adjust it just a little bit more. So again, think of Abby, they'll be underneath you. Joseph Green served as our assistant director on this process. A side note here about Forward and other companies' commitment to the emerging talent in the state based on this. So in early February, Forward launched a new program that will go into regular rotation with our new works programming, the Wisconsin Directors Lab. Dozens of professional, academic, community, and emerging directors converged at Madison College to meet one another, observe rehearsals in progress, address topics of interest in panels, and talk about how we can move the profession forward in the state. No pun intended. Several theaters committed to offering an assistant director opportunity as a means of professional development. Forward has had assistant directors for some time, but as part of the lab, we encouraged applicants to seek a position on an upcoming production. Case is our first post-lab, and next season we will have assistant directors on both Gutenberg the musical and Lady Disdain. And yes, by the way, if you haven't seen what we will be doing next season, it does include both Gutenberg and Lady Disdain, a world premiere by Lauren Gunderson, along with Primary Trust and Ironbound. It's about that time. As I wrap up and send you into the Playhouse, a few more items of note. Please, when you arrive, see our table in the lobby on your way into the theater. There is some literature there which may interest you. You also may have seen it in our newsletters, but there are plenty of resources in Wisconsin which address one of the primary subjects of the play, homeownership, and that phrase again, financial literacy. The Financial Education Department in the UW-Madison Division of Extension features Rent Smart classes and other offerings to that end, for instance. Up next for Forward, our Guilty Pleasures Monologue Festival, our new works installment for this season. 12 playwrights, 12 directors, 12 actors will team up to fess up. We'll be back in the Promenade Hall at the Overture Center May 8th through 10th, and we hope to see you there too. Meanwhile, take gentle care. Thank you for joining me. Enjoy the production, and we will see you ever so soon.